This video is about the astrology for the full moon on October 28th, 2023. Here is the chart. And that allows us to see, and I did this chart specifically for Jerusalem, Israel. And why is that? Well, because you have to pick a location somewhere on the world to generate an astrology chart. And it seemed relevant to make it as about the spiritual place, a spiritual place that's important to multiple cultures and multiple religions, and even beyond the religions, to make it relevant to humanity at this day and age, with everything that's going on and the confusions about the actual history of different places. And so it seemed relevant, important to me to reframe my astrology articles to make them not just about some random place in the world, but to make them oriented to a specific place so that we could see not only the planets in the placements and the angles, the planets and the archetypes and the relationships of different planets to each other, but also about maybe we'll get into some houses, which is where it makes it relevant to the specific places, to the specific place in the chart it's oriented to. So to be clear, this chart is relevant to everyone in the world, everyone on Earth, basically, all of what Earth is. At the moment that the moon passed behind the Earth, so we have this alignment between the sun, the Earth, and the moon in a line. And when that alignment happens, that's really what astrology is about alignments and geometry. So when that alignment happens, this energy comes into play and precipitates down through cosmic consciousness, within the field of solar resonance, which is everything that's within the sun's gravitational field, to affect what life is on Earth. So straightforward enough, right? And so I like to, so this goes back to my Substack articles, my Substack article series, at joshuablattman.substack.com, which you can subscribe to. You get these articles for free, or you can become a paying member to support my work here. But this Solely Lunar Astrology Digest aims to support you in raising your consciousness from 3D to 5D, empowering you to ground yourself at a higher level. Each post is written for the time that we're in right now, acting like the step on a path that came from the step before it, leading to the next. And I like to do astrology because I feel like it helps, rather than fighting, rather than, I think this is a good way to get involved to help raise consciousness, which is why my publication on Substack is called Raising Consciousness. So this full moon occurs at 11:24 p.m. local time in Jerusalem. That's when that alignment happens, like I said, between the sun, the earth, and the moon. The moon is full, exactly opposite to the sun, and in perfect alignment when the sun and moon both pass 35 degrees and 9 minutes on either side of the ecliptic. The moon is early in the 6th degree of Taurus. The ecliptic it's the plane of the galaxy, and that's what makes Aries Aries, and that's what makes Pisces Pisces. Like Aries is above the ecliptic and Pisces is below the ecliptic, right? And so the ecliptic at 0 degrees Aries, 0 degrees Libra is a plane of energetic equilibrium. And so at 6 degrees, the 6th degree of Taurus is the 36th degree above that plane of the ecliptic. And my article goes on to say, I've been writing these astrology digests for an arbitrary place in the world with disregard for the houses, not this one. This is my first full moon chart digest oriented to Jerusalem. So let's get started with Pluto. Pluto is, let me see here. Pluto is, you can see at the chart here, Pluto is at 27 degrees and 58 minutes of this green sign over here in the 6th house, that is Capricorn. And Pluto operates at the cultural level simultaneously through what's being created and what's being destroyed at the same time. For example, the caterpillar becomes mush in order to become a butterfly. And so another way to think about this, or uh, that happens at the caterpillar level, but also at the cultural level, is that creation trails destruction. So it has to become mush before it can become a butterfly. We have to experience lack before we can experience the fulfillment of that lack. So this moment in time is right smack in the middle of Pluto's forwards, backwards typewriting through its greater cycle with directs and retrogrades that represent a multi-year transition from Capricorn and Pluto in Capricorn to Pluto in Aquarius. So Pluto is in the middle of transitioning to Aquarius. Pluto first entered Aquarius during its current orbit on March 23rd, 2023, and Pluto will leave Capricorn for the last time on January 22nd, 2024. So we've got like these several months. I think that date might actually be correct because I'm pretty sure it was in Aquarius for a brief stint last fall, which would be 2022. And so Pluto just stationed direct back on October 10th, almost 3 weeks ago. And all the planets within Pluto's 248-year orbit work together to shape smaller cycles of change within Pluto's larger cycles of creation and destruction. So at this moment in time, what does one do with all the different opinions, perspectives, and purposes? So in other words, agendas. Is the agenda self-serving or is it life-serving? Are we sitting on the same side of the table, looking at the same thing together, or are we sitting on opposite sides of the table, looking at the same thing from different perspectives? And the more we can come to an understanding of what the thing is that we're looking at, the more we're able to come to an understanding of what's actually happening, right? I think that's kind of true throughout life, right? So stay present to a broader truth of inspired aliveness by expanding your mind to include nuggets of information from the noise of all the individual missions. Missions are what comes from opinions, perspectives, and purposes. And by understanding the missions, you don't have to hold as much of the detail. And we have, as you can see in the chart here, we have Venus in Virgo, which is the sign of basically knowing all the details, sacrificing self in service of all the details, trying to learn everything that there is to learn. But hold on a second, we don't have to learn everything if we can hold on to the awareness of what the bigger missions are that are at play here. And we also get a little bit of a hint at that also because Juno here at 4 degrees and 34 minutes is the other sign in Virgo. They're both in Virgo together. So Venus and Juno work together in some ways. So in other words, Venus, the sign of value, the sign of, sun is the center of the solar system. Mercury is the first orbit, the first satellite of the sun. And that allows the recognition of duality and the recognition of contrast and this thing being different than that thing. And the third planet, Venus, gives us, oh, well, do I agree with this one or do I agree with this one? So it gives us another vantage point from which we can recognize, from which consciousness itself can understand perspective and can make a value assessment, which is why Venus is associated with value in the first place. So Venus is in the same sign with Juno, and Juno is all about, Juno is really about suffering and lack and seeing what is with what isn't in order to recognize that reality is both things regardless of your preference. So so we have what is and we have what isn't, and Juno can make we can get emotional until we really understand that everything, even the best of situations, has some degree of unideal, or like the opposite of what's ideal. The things we have to deal with, the things we have to suffer. Until we can wrap our minds around that, then we're wrestling with Juno, and regardless of how it's aspected in each individual chart, we'll just leave it at there. But so just to say that our perspectives of values and our desire to know all the details, the more we get obsessed with details, the more we're gonna, the more uncomfortable I think it's gonna be. If we can hold on to with the bigger understanding of the understanding of the bigger picture, the more we can like be at power, be in agency with whatever situations we're in. So back to Pluto, right? So Pluto is moving direct now. It encourages us to stay present to the broader truth of inspired aliveness by expanding our minds to include the nuggets of information from the noise of all the individual missions. Missions are what comes from opinions, perspectives, and purposes. And by understanding the missions, you don't have to hold as much of the detail. I did say that part already. Understand more by knowing less. That is a high perspective. The details are, by understanding more, it will help you to stay unattached to the situational chaos. Like any good crisis, it can crush our spirit, or it can drive us to focus and raise our game, to be of higher service to the consciousness of which we are a part by putting our work into the world. Think higher, not harder, right? That's I grew up hearing work hard, play hard, but you can work really hard at the wrong things. Like you can work really hard and work yourself to the bone and not really get very far, or you can like work smart and build technology that creates a higher likelihood of humanity's destruction, which just means you're working smart, but you're not working from a spiritual foundation. You're working from thinking that you're smarter than everybody else and you could just get free from making technology, and that it spins itself out, and humanity itself suffers. So think higher, not harder is a motto I like. So amongst all the stations that make us, that with planets are moving direct and or retrograde, they station right before they do either one. Station means that they stop on the chart and they stop moving forwards or backwards. So all the planets, I think it's kind of interesting that all the planets are in retrograde. All the planets above the horizon in the Jerusalem chart are in retrograde, and all the planets below the horizon are in direct motion. And so that above and below the horizon line is, it's, one of many distinctions that you'll find in astrology. The above the horizon line is symbolic of what happens of the what happens in the realm of the collective, and the below the horizon line is what happens within the realm of the individual. You can see that from the houses. Like I'm not sure if you can see my mouse here or not, but below the AC on the left side of that chart here, we have the AC as the ascendant. That's the horizon, or sorry, that's the eastern horizon. That's where the sunrise happens. And so below that horizon line, we have towards the middle, you see a number 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then above that thick black line, we have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. the 1 through 6 houses correspond to the 1 through 6 signs, which is Aries through Virgo, and those are all individual processes. And at the chart level, what's underneath the horizon is on the other side of the world, right? From the open sky above, wherever you're standing. And so that's what gives the houses their meaning. Well, that's the beginning of what gives the houses their meaning. The thick black line in the middle, in case you're wondering, that's not exactly up and down, represents the vertical axis that is truly vertical wherever this a chart is calculated for. And so even though it's not straight up and down on the chart, that's just because the Earth is on a tilt on its axis. And so it's interesting to me that all the planets above the horizon are in retrograde and all the planets below the horizon are direct. So what that means to me on a big picture, right, is that, so what does retrograde mean, first of all, right? Retrograde means that it requires a shift in perspective to actually be able to understand. So the shift in perspective comes with the understanding that even though the planets look like they're moving backwards from the perspective of Earth, of course they're not moving backwards. They're just moving backwards from the perspective of Earth. So even though what it means is that things don't always look like they seem. Things don't always seem as they are. I think it's better way to say it. Things don't always appear as they are. So with all the planets above the horizon, above Jerusalem's, in Jerusalem's above Jerusalem's sky, the planets look like they're moving backwards while we know that they're actually moving forwards. It's just that Earth is changing. Earth is moving faster than all the planets are above the horizon, except the moon, of course, which is direct and moves faster than the Earth. And so it requires a shift in perspective to understand the changes that are happening. The planets underneath the horizon, the planets below the horizon, in other words, the planets on the other side of the world, those are all direct. So as we see, which I mentioned before, Juno, and then Venus, and then the Sun, Mercury, Mars, and Ceres. Ceres is an asteroid within the asteroid belt. It's the largest one by far. And then Pluto, way over on the right at the end of the 6th house. Those are all moving direct. And so that implies that because the Sun, Mercury, and Venus are the planets inside of the Earth's orbit, they mean something that has to do with our intuition and the way our mind works and the way our individuality processes information. And then Mars is it's outside of Earth's orbit, but it's inside of the asteroid belt. So it's about how the individual asserts its individuality to explore deeper beyond itself. So again, assert is a good keyword for thinking about Mars. So we might think that Jerusalemites, right, are with the conjunction of Mercury and Mars, and all 4 of these planets here, Sun, Mercury, Mars, and Ceres, all in Scorpio, that we might think that that it's about recognizing the forward direction that the heart of Jerusalem those with a heart in Jerusalem have to accept in order to move forward. So Jerusalem specifically, nowhere else on the planet, very few places, most of the rest of the world has this collection of planets in a different house, right? If you were on the opposite side of the world from Jerusalem at this exact full moon, this chart would be turned upside down, like exactly opposite, to show that, like, because that would be the orientation, because it mirrors the orientation of life, right? Like the chart mirrors what's happening in real life. So this fourth house, 10th house axis is about the foundation of individuality, like the foundation of, yeah, the foundation of uh, how you know yourself. So personal security would be a good signature for the fourth house. The 10th house is more about security in the world. So like professional security, um, economic security, uh, cultural and professional authority, those kinds of things. Because with more authority, you have more security, hypothetically. And so just to point out that all the planets above the horizon are in retrograde and all the planets below the horizon are direct. So there's this battle between um, the, getting your collective needs met and having your personal security needs met at the same time. Okay, so the next thing that's happening that I find interesting is if we can look at this moment as a snapshot through time. Mercury and Venus are both past their post retrograde shadows and not yet into their next pre retrograde shadows. So that means that they're both charting new territory. Does that make sense? Kind of, I hope so. So when Mercury and Venus both go around the sun inside of the Earth, right? And so they go direct and they come around retrograde and they station between the directs and the retrogrades. And when they go retrograde, they're tracing backwards over the same space that they've already been. And then they go, once they move forward again, they go out of their post retrograde shadow after they've gone retrograde. They go in new territory before they enter into the zone of their next retrograde shadow, where they're, they go past the point where they'll stop retrograding next. So it's like do like an inchworm. So in other words, both Mercury and Venus are charting new territory. So the movements that we are making as humanity, the movement that humans are making across the world now are setting up the next phase of their growth and development. They're not like beta testing things like they would in a pre-retrograde shadow, and they're not implementing the learning of the A/B testing like they would in the post-retrograde shadow. They are charting new territory, making new understandings, creating new learning experiences in this phase between retrogrades. So Saturn stations direct at 0 degrees 31 minutes of Pisces on November 4th. There's more on this later down in a little bit, but that's that's next week. That'll happen on November 4th, like I said. So that means that it's Pisces, so it implies economic, financial systems having to do with Saturn. Jupiter and Uranus are both still retrograde, though Jupiter is starting to slow down in preparation to station direct on Jupiter 30th. December 30th, Jupiter stations direct on December 30th. Uranus stations direct in January of next year. In this phase that we're in now, consciousness itself is collecting new experiences and learning about its new capabilities as we've been getting massive upgrades the last several months. that confers to that what I was saying before about charting new territory. Because of what Pluto's doing, kind of inchworming itself forward into Aquarius, we're in a special kind of luminous space where we either incorporate our identities with our visions, our past with our future, and our spirituality with our physicality, while living the process that only exists in the moment, or we're fighting from foundations of unconscious emotional intensity that exists based on narratives and not based on actual history. Let me say that one again. That one's kind of a big deal. So we're in this special kind of luminous space at this full moon where we're either incorporating our identities with our visions, our past with our future, and our spirituality with our physicality, while living the process, which only exists in the moment, or we're fighting from foundations of unconscious emotional intensity that exists only based on narratives and not history. So narratives means like stories, right? So just because it's a story that you've heard a lot doesn't mean it's necessarily true. What's the actual history? Look at the archaeology. That's a good way to find out what the history is. Above and below is the next little section here. The planets are moving the same way regardless of the perspective from Earth, but their orientation to above and below the horizon is specific to Jerusalem. I think I already talked about this part. So this means that the stories without context are likely to be dramatized based on the preferred narrative of the writer and speaker. It means it's extra important to understand the greater truth, to not become a pawn in someone else's vision, someone else's operation, or someone else's mission. So this is what I was talking about. Goes back to what I was talking about when I said, are you sitting on the opposite side of the table looking at the piece of paper from different perspectives, or are you sitting on the same side of the table looking at the paper together, right? What's the perspective that you have with a particular with a person, with a culture, as so it might be useful to move forward. Features of this chart: Mercury is conjunct Mars. Sun, Mars, and Mercury are opposite the Moon and Jupiter all in a T-square with Pluto. And the third feature that I want to point out is that every planet besides Mars and Pluto is retrograde. Every planet between Mars and Pluto, so that wouldn't be Jupiter or Mercury, right? Every planet between Mars and Pluto, which would be Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, is in retrograde. And what this means is that it highlights the personal attunement to cultural evolution. One area of growth for me personally as an astrologer has to do with layers. The layer of inner planets works differently than the layer of middle planets or outer planets, if for no other reason than they stay relatively close to the sun. For example, you would never have Sun opposite Mercury in an astrology chart because the Earth never passes inside the orbit of Mercury. Same for Venus. And here's a chart. I wish I didn't have this set up to show you on the video. Let me see if I can change this real quick. See if I can add another screen to the video here. Share screen. Let me see if I can do this. Thanks for being patient with me. I hope you're digging this. This is my first one like this, and I'll probably, I anticipate, I hope I'll get better as I do this more. So share screen. Here we go. I'll share my Substack article with you here. And what I wanted to do here was show you, here's the chart with just the inner planets, right? The sun, Mercury, Venus, and then the lunar nodes. And it's interesting because the sun is just past the lunar south node, and the moon is just past the lunar north node. And what that means is that it really goes back to that Pluto thing I was talking about before, which is that, let me see if I can just go up and read it real quick. Creation trails destruction. That's what I was trying to say. Creation trails destruction. So that we create with our minds and we see its effects in the world, right? So from Gandhi on out to multiple different coaches throughout the industry talk about how our beliefs become our thoughts, become our behavior, become our habits, become our addictions, become our life, right? And so starting way back at that beliefs standpoint, like who are we as individuals? And so this moon transiting the north node is a big deal for recognizing that, for thinking about that, because the moon is how we reflect, is how light reflects into the darkness of Earth. And so that metaphorically, symbolically, metaphysically are all kind of the same thing in astrology. Um, confers a layer of we're being repotentialized, and we're individually getting upgrades, but at the same time we're having to deal with the passions of past karma threatening our right to exist, which is what our individuality, which is, you know, our individuality, confronting old stories. Okay, so moving on. As I'm saying, the Sun, Mercury, and the lunar south node occupy the fourth house. This house is known as the foundation of the personal identity. It shows how we establish our needs for safety and security. So, in other words, Jerusalemites are fighting for their homes and their right to exist. The mini segment of Scorpio from 5 degrees to 10 degrees, where these planets find themselves, is guided by a desire to share and unite through the wisdom of fellowship, and is guided by the transformative power where shared passion and activity bonds at the root of consciousness. So there's a shared, there's a camaraderie, regardless of what side you're on in whatever fight you find yourself in, whatever intensity, whatever human connection story that you feel passionately about, we are all creating bonds of activity. We're all feeling bonded to each other through our various emotional attachments. The lunar south node, shown at 24 degrees 25 minutes Libra, 24 degrees 54 minutes Libra, is closest to the thick line that and suggests that this right to exist is demonstrated through a battle with entrenched labels. In other words, stories and narratives. Whatever you name, you deify, which is what the whole idea of Hashem is in Judaism, because Shem means name, and so the Hashem means the name. So whatever you name is what you deify. So in more plain words, Jerusalemites may be recognizing that they're inevitably entangled with conflicts they feel they can never escape. In the material world, in the layer of the 3D, so it's about accessing spirituality through the collective in order to access that higher north node energy. So that idea, as I say in the article, this idea that we're entangled with conflicts, that Jerusalemites are entangled with conflicts they can never escape, is habitual and self-isolating thinking. It kind of feels like some Stockholm syndrome stuff. Let me go back to the other article, the other picture. Hello. Right? I'm trying to have fun with this, because why can't it be fun? Share screen, and we're going back to this picture. Yes, got it. So StreamYard, and I'm back in the corner. Awesome, coolio. So again, this idea that we're entangled with conflicts that we can never escape is habitual and self-isolating thinking. And we might over-identify with that suffering, right? Because remember, Venus and Juno, the planet that represents the principle of suffering, well, not planet, the asteroid that represents the principle of suffering, they're in the same house and they're all managing the details. They're both managing the details together. And if we get too attached to that, it could bring on a bit of a Stockholm syndrome where we might feel, we might become addicted to the suffering. And I think I already mentioned this, but by remembering that Jerusalemites' heart connects to a shared peoplehood all over the world, it can escape the political double bind and overcome obstacles to maintain continuity through humanity's evolution. The moon, on the other hand, is full when it's in linear alignment on the outside of Earth. By remembering their shared heart connection through peoplehood all over the Earth, Jerusalemites can access the top half of the chart where the full moon is, which transited the lunar north node less than 24 hours before the exact full moon. This transit, in other words, moon passing the lunar north node, highlights the destiny signature. And with it being in the 10th house, it's about how Jerusalemites create, achieve, and demonstrate authority in the world. Erratically and emotionally, or calculated and measured, and in that first example with maximum casualty, or in the second example with minimum casualty and respect for life ultimately. So as we'll discuss in a moment with a Taurus Scorpio polarity, leaning into enduring individual connections rather than identities that project suffering, aka empathy over whimpering, is key for living into our highest potential at this time. Because the North Node is in Aries and the Moon is in Taurus, both personal signs, as opposed to the Sun, Mercury, and South Node being in the collective signs of Scorpio and Libra, respectively, Jerusalemites will feel the best about life by focusing into their unifying spiritual identity. In other words, collectively personal, rather than its opposite energy, which would be about projecting their personal plights onto their collective fellowship, onto their collective, just for the sake of not shaking things up too much, which is a Libra shadow thing. In other words, be more afraid of going against God's voice within you than by going against man's voice that condemns you. So the social planets, if we can take a quick look here at the, go over here to this, you can see the social planets brings us to the moon and Jupiter. I want to point that out right there. And so the middle planets layer is not our internal worlds, it's our shared collective world. So that would be outside of the asteroid belt, but still viewable with the naked eye. So Saturn is the farthest planet that we can see with the naked eye. So basically the collective planets are Jupiter and Saturn. Those are the two planets the two farthest planets that we can see with the naked eye. Outside of Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and Eris, we can really only see with telescopes. And that's why they're called the social planets. And Mars, right? Because Mars is about how we exert our individuality out into the world. It's still a personal planet, but it's personal in a social context. So Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn are all operational in the 3D world. Mars is the first planet outside of the Earth, though it's also inside the asteroid belt and represents how the individual exerts its life force out into the unknown. Jupiter is the largest planet in the solar system, and it's the first one outside of the asteroid belt. It expands everything it touches, both good and bad. And that's one reason a keyword to working with Jupiter is benevolence. So in other words, generosity. Okay, so Saturn is the second largest planet in the solar system and the farthest planet we Earthlings can see without technological help. Therefore, it metaphysically represents boundaries, structures, limits, etc. I shared the image in my article to help you see the interpersonal layer by itself. But it's interesting how similar the interpersonal layer is to the individual and the inner layer. which suggests and adds to the broader ideas I've been talking about, that individuals are finding the internal strength to fight for the right to exist at the cultural level. So we're fighting for our spiritual foundations. We're fighting for our um, soul's right to exist in the world. Yep. As you can see, the sun and moon are exactly opposite, which is what the full moon is, but also Mars is exactly opposite to Jupiter. I put the quotes around exactly because it's exactly 9 minutes past exact. Technically, 9 minutes past exact. That puts it at the beginning of the full phase, and it's about, it refers back to Libra, which is the opposite from Aries. And so it's about seeing one's self in the fulfillment of the potential that was released at the conjunction. And so if we're thinking about when Mars conjoined Jupiter, I didn't get the actual date on that. But knowing that the orbit of Jupiter is about, or sorry, the orbit of Mars is about 2 years, I would give it probably 13, 14 months ago that Mars transited Jupiter, right? Because Jupiter's moved a bit since Mars passed it. So I'd probably call it last summer. Okay, so when Mars is in Scorpio, is opposite Jupiter in Taurus, there's a fervor for action. An urge to express this fervor has been rising up to the point of the exact opposition, and I suspect that the next few weeks will show a clearer urge to find equilibrium between taking action and stepping back to understand if that action was, quote, enough to establish one's needs. There may likely be opportunities to learn valuable lessons about how to assert yourself effectively through power struggles between financial security and material possessions, and through conflicts about personal needs and material growth and expansion. So, a quick thing about Taurus and Scorpio. The Taurus-Scorpio polarity is highlighted not only because of the sun and the full moon, but because there are multiple planets participating in the polarity. Taurus and Scorpio archetypes, some contrast and some similarities here. Taurus represents what we stand firm for, where Scorpio is about what we keep quiet about and internalize. Taurus is simple relationships with nature versus Scorpio is about deep relationships with hidden realms. Taurus is ruled by Venus, whereas Scorpio is ruled by Mars and Pluto. Taurus is practical, grounded, and interested in enduring value, whereas Scorpio is interested in intuition and maybe even some of the occult stuff, like what we're talking about now. Both Taurus and Scorpio are stubborn. They're concentrative signs, or in other words, cardinal. In medieval astrology, the modern wise, I call it concentrative. Fixed is the medieval astrology way to say that they're stubborn. So planets in Taurus include the moon, Jupiter, and Uranus, while planets in Scorpio include the sun, Mercury, Mars, and Ceres, which is the largest center of mass in the asteroid belt. The moon conjunct Jupiter in retrograde in Taurus. Some key ideas for that is spaciousness and expansion, confrontations with resistance. The shadow feels like constriction and barrenness or desolation. There could also likely be feelings of optimism, especially by acknowledging details and working through your feelings about them. So feelings that are overwhelming need time, patience, and attention. Breathe into any constrictions and accept them a part of what living a human life is and give them space to be. Remember, because Juno and Venus, because Juno's with Venus in Virgo, this gives us extra energy to recognize what is lacking. So recognize what's important, but also recognize what's lacking, and recognize that light and dark exist together. That God is both the light and the dark, and you can't have one without the other. And so by honoring or recognizing that dark exists, but not spending your time in it, you can polarize against it and put your attention more on the light and spend your time and attention on the light, because what you focus on grows. So if you acknowledge that darkness is there, but don't spend your time in it, you'll, I think you'll have a more enjoyable experience of life. So acknowledging the feelings, acknowledging the energy without necessarily believing that what they're saying is yours. I think a lot about that movie, What Dreams May Come, with Robin Williams. Great movie. But at the end, he goes into the home. His wife in the movie commits suicide, and she finds herself in having created her own hell, and he wants to go save her, but the angel that's played by Cuba Gooding Jr. tells him that if he accepts her reality as his own, he'll never be able to leave. So he has to go into, so in order for him to get her out, have any possibility of helping her walk out herself, he has to go into her world, but not accept it as real for him. It's really kind of a high level thing that I encourage you all to play with. So Sun conjunct Mars in Scorpio. This would indicate how entrenchments conflict with ideas for moving forward. I'm seeing industrial entrenchments like all over the place, like looking around at the world. And it's not just like one industry, it's like lots of different industries, and it's industrial entrenchment. It is what it is. Again, not putting a value judgment on it, not putting my emotional energy into it, but recognizing it and then just going, okay, and then what do I want to exist in the opposite, which is where the light is. So again, Sun conjunct Mars in Scorpio, throwing caution to the wind, tearing oneself away from the familiar for an all-absorbing intensity, like a union with a vision or a dream, while in order to display status. Virtue signaling. I wrote, will be outed. This will fall apart and ultimately collapse after November 18th, when Sun conjoins Mars in the 26th degree of Scorpio, and a new impulse for forward direction will be born in the world. A new wisdom, I think I could say, a new cultural wisdom will be born. So let's look into combining these energies. If you're still with me, we're 48 minutes into this live stream, and I hope you're having fun. So combining energies, feeling torn apart from the familiar and the known, and being drawn into a dream. This has a lot to do with Saturn. The world is kind of maybe becoming a bit of a game. So the 3D reality constructs are breaking down, and we're living up and into a marriage of enduring values with timeless truths. That's a big one. 3D reality constructs are breaking down, and we're living up and into a marriage of enduring values with timeless truths. Because all of the planets across the top of the chart are in retrograde, Saturn through Uranus, there's emphasis on material order unraveling. By reconciling what's important with what's true, you'll more effectively clarify your signal and manifest your highest good. So, upcoming, Saturn stations direct on November 4th at 9:03 a.m. Jerusalem time. Less than a week after the full moon, just about a day before the 3/4 lunar square, Saturn stations direct. Let me see if I can just show you this chart real quick. I wonder if I can do this quickly and easily. I'll stop this one. I'll stop this screen share, and I'll try a different screen share. I'll share this one. Haha. As you can see here, this is what the chart will look like in Jerusalem for when Saturn stations direct on November 4th. The moon will have gone from 9 degrees Taurus all the way around to 29 degrees Cancer, almost the 30th degree of Cancer. So that's really going to be about how we make decisions and um, how decisions help us consolidate what we consolidate around, where we decide what we decide is important, really. As Saturn is stationing direct and getting ready to move all the way back through Pisces. So let me go back to, and as you can see, like the Sun and Mars have both moved a few degrees. So I'm going to stop that one and go back to the chart itself. There we go. When less than a week after the full moon, just about a day before the 3/4 lunar square, Saturn stations direct. Saturn's retrograde speed is slowing down at this full moon. It has been slowing down for several weeks now, and it will station direct on November 4th. This will be a time to complete your spiritual growth and build our shared reality on what's important and true for the future. It's a time to set new intentions and reevaluate your approach for moving forward. It's a time for reestablishing your personal boundaries based on new systems, structures, limits, and plans that have been unraveling and reimagined and are being reimagined since Saturn stationed retrograde back on June 17th, 2023. I'm showing you that moment with the social planets above to highlight the moon is 150 degrees to Saturn, which is called an inconjunct or a biquintile. It's challenging us to reconcile the impacts of prolonged passivity. Wow. The Sun passes opposition to Jupiter, challenging us to understand information previously kept secret. Here's the same thing going on with all the planets and the asteroids to show you more of what's going on. So I'll give you a quick glimpse of that chart and shared screen. This one. Here's a quick glimpse of that chart. Saturn's here, right? And the moon, just as what I showed you a moment ago, is at 20 in the 30th degree of Cancer. What I want to communicate with these two images is that we're getting a chance to make new decisions about how to move forward. But that's only possible to the extent that we've truly forgiven the past. This is the time to explore deeply, to live bravely, and to acknowledge wholly without judging harshly. Let me say that one, it's kind of a big deal. This is a time to explore deeply, to live bravely, and to acknowledge wholly without judging harshly. With Mars inside the orbit of Mercury and Mercury conjunct Ceres, which represents the principle of natural rhythm, on November 4th, our passions will soften into new sensitivities that help us be adaptable and flexible as we move through this liminal space of cultural change related back to Pluto. So I'll read this summary for you, and then we'll be done. The challenge that feels important to highlight here lies in the distinction between fervor and ferocity. Fervor is defined as an intense and passionate feeling, and ferocity, as ferocious, is defined as savagely fierce, cruel, or violent. So what does it mean to be fierce without being savage? Discuss maybe this with someone important to you, this distinction. May we stand for measured responses to atrocities by expanding our minds to broader contexts instead of emotional responses to situational chaos, no matter how devastating that situational chaos might be. May we feel our feelings, excavate our shadows. This is an eclipse after all, and express our truest and most authentic needs as a demonstration of our right to exist without demonstration of unjust violence. That is the whole reading of my full moon astrology chart for the full moon on October 28th, 2023, specifically for Jerusalem and the soul of humanity that exists in Jerusalem. That's all I have for you today. Hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to share this with someone that you think might get value out of it, or someone who you know who knows other people who might get value out of it. That's it for today. Be well.